Today we're going to add a procedural shooting animation to our characters. We're not going to use a pre-made animation. We're going to animate by code using tools such as animation curves. This will give us much more flexibility in creating a good shooting animation and will give better results compared to animation you can find, for example, on Mixamo, which are pretty underwhelming. So we'll see how to do it, and we'll also add some sound effects and particle systems to our combat mechanic. In this video, we're not really going to add any AI code. However, having polished animations is also part of making good game AI, because from the point of view of the player, all they're going to see is how the characters are animated, how they move, and what they do. So in this course, we're going to stop from time to time and add some visual stuff, and this will contribute to making the AI feel more realistic. And this is a good principle to follow in game development in general. When you create some really technical systems, you want to stop from time to time and have something visual. So it's important to have this visual progress as well as technical progress. Okay, let's do it. Let's add some sound effects to the gun. So I'm in the gun prefab. I'm going to add an audio source. Then let's open the gun script. Let's create an event header. Then let's add a Unity event called shot. And let's go to the try shoot method and let's invoke the event here. So in the same folder where we have our gun script, let's create a new script called gun sound player. Let's add a reference to our audio source and let's add a reference to our shot clip. Let's create a public method, play shot sound, and let's call the play one shot method on the audio source with our shot clip. Now back to the gun prefab. Let's add the gun sound player script here and let's assign the audio source. On the audio source, we don't need to play on awake. Yeah, since we don't even have an audio clip here. And let's make sure the spatial blend is set at 3D. The slider should be all the way to the right. Now let's set our shot clip. I downloaded a sound file from Mixamo, so it's in content, sounds, Mixamo CC0. Okay, now what we need to do is actually expose the shot event. So let's add a serialized field to our shot event. So now we're going to hook up the method on the gun sound player. So let's go to gun sound player, then play shot sound. So I modified the sound a little bit in Audacity, and here it is. Now we're going to use the new sound clip. I believe the gun shoots too fast. So let's change the rate of fire to like 0.25. Okay, now we're going to change the right hand rig. We're actually going to use the same constraint that we use on the left hand. And the objective is to implement a procedural firing animation. So let's go to Xbot. So we're going to replace the multi-aim constraint with a 2-bone IK. So let's set the tip at the right hand, the mid at the right forearm, and the root at the right arm. Let's create a target and a hint. And actually, I'm going to parent them to the spine. So let's right click on the right hand and let's create an empty here. Let's call it right hand target. And let's create another one. Let's call it right hand hint. So I'm going to parent the hint to the right hand target and I'm going to put it somewhere over here. I guess this should be fine, but we're going to modify it at runtime. So let's go back to the rig and let's set the target and the hint, and I'm going to reparent the right hand target to the spine here. So when I'm aiming, my character looks like this. That's because we need to modify the right hand target. So the hint should be somewhere over here. So this looks natural. Let's save the value of the right hand target. So we're going to copy this component, and then for the hint, so perhaps the value of 0.2 minus 0.2 and minus 0.2 or minus 0.3. We'll set the hint to this value. So 0.2 minus 0.2, then minus 0.3. And for the right hand target, let's paste the component values. Then let's apply the changes. So we can actually use both constraint on the right hand, both the multi-aim constraint and the 2-bone IK. So I put them in different objects. Here I have the 2-bone IK constraint, and here I have the multi-aim constraint. In the rig builder, I added both constraints here, and it's important that the order is respected. So first we need the 2-bone constraint, then we're going to aim the hand at the aim target with the right hand aim rig. Then we have the left hand rig. And actually, let's grab the right hand target. So here, if I move the right hand target, you can see that the gun is always pointing at the aim target. So we have the freedom to choose where we want the gun to be, and it's always going to be rotated properly. So if we choose a value like this, something closer to the chest, so this looks better. So I'm going to copy the values of the right hand target transform, and actually I only need the position. The rotation doesn't matter anymore. So I'm going to copy the component, then back to edit time. Let's make sure we go into the export prefab, or if you change the value of the transform, make sure to apply the changes to the prefab. So let's go to the spine, right hand target, and let's paste the value of the component. Now all we have to do is add this new right hand rig to the NPC look so that it can be enabled and disabled with the rest of the rigs. So let's open the NPC look script. Let's add a reference to both the right arm rig and the right aim rig in the update arms rig method. We're going to change the weight of both the right arm rigs, and this should do it. So let's go to our NPC prefab, and in NPC look, we're going to set the second right arm rig. Okay, so now we have a reference to both the right arm rigs in the NPC look script, and they'll be both active when we aim. So let's perform the test. I'm going to aim. Okay, this looks good. Okay, so that's the first step to making a procedural shooting animation. So now that we have a right hand target, what we'll do is simply move it like this. So let's add a script on our gun object. So let's get into our gun object. So let's put the script in scripts, NPC, combat. Let's call it procedural shoot animation. We're going to need a reference to our hand target. We will need to back up the starting local position that we're going to set in the start method. So we're going to set it to hand target.local position. Then let's define the magnitude of the movement. This is the max distance that the hand target can reach, and these values can be negative. We're going to add an animation curve for each axis. So for the X, Y, and Z axis, let's also define the duration of the animation. Let's set it to 0.4 by default. We're also going to need a timer, and let's define the onShot method that we're going to use in the gun events. And in this method, we'll simply reset the timer. In the update method, we'll add time delta time to our timer. If timer has reached the duration, then we should reset the local position of the hand target to the starting local position. However, in our animation curves, we should always go back to 0. So just in case somehow we don't go back to 0, we'll do this. So here we're going to use our animation curves. First, we need a normalized timer between 0 and 1. For that, we can divide our timer by the duration of the animation. Then we're going to evaluate each curve using the normalized timer, and we're going to store the values in delta X, delta Y, and delta Z for each curve. Then we'll set the local position of our hand target to starting local position plus a new vector tree made of delta X, delta Y, and delta Z. So here we forgot to multiply by our magnitude. So let's do it. And I'm also guessing that here we're adding a vector in world space. I'm guessing this will not work as we expected, but we'll perform a test and we'll see the results. So we are in the gun prefab. Let's add our procedural shoot animation here. So we'll set all of these values at runtime. Let's go into the export prefab. So we're going to set the hand target on the gun. Let's set it to the right hand target. So we have our right hand target here. We'll need it to move on the green axis, which is the Y axis. So it's going to move like this. So the script is controlling the position of the right hand target. It will not allow me to move it. Let's go back to the export prefab. Then let's go into the gun prefab. So let's hook up the method on the procedural shoot animation with the gun. So let's add a new field in the shot event, and let's set it to procedural shoot animation, and let's find our onShot method. So let's just set these values to something. So for the curves, so let's set it to this line, and let's right click on here, edit key. Let's set the value to 0. So if we do it like this, so this is the curve X. So the X coordinate of the hand rig will go from 1 to 0 during the duration of the animation. So let's copy this curve to the other coordinates. So let's go back with our script selected. Let's run the game. So let's shoot. Yeah, that's way too much. That's way too much. So let's set the magnitude on X to 0 and magnitude on Z to 0. And on Y, let's set it to 0.5. Yeah. So indeed, we are moving the hand target in the local space of the parent, which is the spine. So as you can see here, the spine has a red axis in this direction. So when I shoot, the gun is moving in this direction. Of course, if you change this, so let's go back to our gun. If we change the magnitude to 0, 0, 1 or 0.5, so if we want it to be on the blue axis, it's not going to be on the blue axis of the gun. It's actually going to be on the blue axis of the spine. So it's not exactly what we want. So as you can see here, the gun is moving on the blue axis of the spine. So what we need to do, we need to operate on the axis of the right hand target. So back to our procedural animation script, let's create a local offset variable. So we're going to transform this local offset to world offset using hand target transform direction. Then we're going to use inverse transform direction on the hand target's parent with the world offset as parameter. And now this offset will match the axis of our hand target. So let's perform a test. So here I have my inspector. So my procedural shoot animation has a magnitude of 0.5 on the x-axis. And here I have my right hand target selected. So the x-axis is pointing down, as you can see. So I'm going to shoot. And as you can see, the hand is moving down. Now let's set the magnitude to 0, 0.5. So now the gun is moving in the y direction. That's good. And then let's set it to 0, 0, 0.5. And now the gun will be moving in the blue axis direction, which is the Z axis of the right hand target. Okay, so that's exactly what we want. So the other NPCs are investigating the noise. Okay, never mind that. Okay, so let's now work on these values until we get something that looks good. So for the magnitude, let's start with the Y axis. Let's set it to 0.5. We don't want it to move forward. So let's set it to minus, something like that. But the magnitude is too high. Let's set it to minus 0.1. Yeah, this looks more decent, but let's set it somewhere in between, minus 0.2. Yeah, perhaps minus 15. Okay, yeah, that looks good. So perhaps we can add some more magnitudes on the other axis. Let's add some magnitude on the x-axis. Let's add something like 0.05. Let's set it to a negative value, minus 0.5, so the gun will go up a little bit. Okay, now for the z-axis, what we can do is perhaps also a negative value, something very small, like minus 0.03, for example. Yeah, this is barely noticeable, so perhaps something bigger. No, that's too much, 0.4, for example. So on the y-axis, let's set it to minus 0.2. Okay, and now let's work on the curves. Let's start with the y curve. So if we zoom out, we can definitely exceed 1. So we want our y to start at the 0 and then quickly climb to the max value and then slowly return to 1. So let's double click to add some values here. Let's add a value over here, something like this. And then let's right click on this edit key and set the value to 0. Okay, so this will make our curve climb to 1 and then slowly go back to 0. Perhaps it will sustain the curve a little bit and then slowly go back. Let's add another point here. Okay, something like this. So this will actually make the curve come back faster to 0. We actually want the opposite. Let's test a curve like this. Yeah, perhaps the magnitude is too big. Set it to 0.17. Yeah, these NPCs are really annoying. Let's go somewhere where they can't follow us. Yeah, perhaps we should directly start at the top. So let's right click here, edit key, set the value to 1. Yeah, so perhaps we need to keep doing what we've been doing in the beginning. Directly start at the top and then slowly go back to 0. Let's test a curve like this. Yeah, the gun stays too much. Yeah, we need it to come back faster. So let's let's reset to this curve and let's set this value to 0. We want the gun to return faster to 0 perhaps. Let's test something like this. Let's make it less linear. And here let's add just a little bit of sustain, just so the curve sustains the one value over here, just a little bit. Okay, so this looks more reactive. So about the other curves, so for the x-axis, let's actually add some variation. So we're going to do something like this, and then something like this, and then it's going to rise up again a little bit, and then perhaps start at a small value. So if we do it like this, yeah, you can see that the gun bounces a little bit. Let's edit it again. We don't want it to bounce that much, so perhaps it can bounce just a little and then go back. Perhaps go back faster to 0. As for the Z curve, let's also make it a bit more interesting. Perhaps something like this. This looks pretty good. So let's copy this component. Let's go out of play mode. Now let's go into the XBot prefab and into our gun prefab. Then let's paste the values of the component. Okay, now we are in combat with a brand new firing animation. Yeah, so we have a firing animation, we have sound effects. Let's go ahead and animate the spine as well. We already have a spine rig with a multi-aim constraint. When shooting, we can manipulate this offset. For example, for the X, something like this. And for the Y, perhaps something like this. And for the Z, so we're going to apply a value on each coordinate of the offset, and we have to take into account that the spine is not exactly pointing forward. So this is the spine transform. So we'll have to apply a little bit of rotation on each axis. We can create a separate script to handle the spine animation, but let's do it in procedural shoot animation. So let's organize our code. So let's create an animate hand method. And let's put all of this code in there. Let's have the normalized timer as parameter and let's pass it along in here. So we're going to have an animate hand method and we'll also have an animate spine method. Let's create an animate spine method by just copying the animate hand. So we're going to need some variables. Let's use the Unity Engine animation rigging package. Let's make this script optional. So if hand target is not defined, so in animate hand, if hand target is not defined, we're going to silently return. We'll do the same thing for the spine. For example, if you have your gun on an object that doesn't have these rigs, or for example, if you want to test the gun. Okay, so let's add a few parameters. We're going to need a reference to the spine multi-aim constraint, and we also need the magnitude of the offset and 3 animation curves for each coordinate. Then we're going to store the starting offset in this private variable. So in the start method, so in here, let's check if hand target is defined. As I said, we want these animations to be optional. So in case we didn't define a hand target or the spine constraint, we don't want anything to happen. Okay, so we're getting the offset using spine constraint.data.offset and we're storing it in our private variable. Let's scroll down to our animate spine method. Let's rename it to animate spine. I forgot to do that. Okay, so the delta x will be computed using spine offset x. Let's replace the curves here and we're going to multiply by the spine offset magnitude. Okay, so this is done. Now we just have to apply the offset. So I'm going to remove this. So the offset will be spine starting offset plus the values that we got from the curves. Then we're going to set the offset on the constraint data to this offset. At the beginning of the method, let's make sure that spine constraint is not null. Otherwise, we're going to return and do nothing. And in the update method, when the timer has reached the duration, let's set the spine constraint offset back to the spine starting offset. And let's add if statements so that we only do this if hand target is not null and if spine constraint is not null. Okay, now let's go back to the editor and run the game, and we're going to tweak the values. In the XBot prefab, let's set the spine constraint here. Let's give this inspector some default values. Let's set it to 10 on each coordinate. Remember that this is a rotation in degrees, and for each curve, so we're going to edit the value of the second point. Let's have them all like this by default. Then we can tweak them. So I'm going to copy the curve and paste it on each coordinate. Okay, so we're going to run the game. Okay, so I'm going to grab the inspector of the gun. So let's have our scene camera on the character, just so we can see the animation. Okay, so I'm going to shoot. So my multi-aim constraint is not defined. I'm going to right click on it, then revert. That will revert to the value in the XBot prefab. So let's aim. Okay, so the spine rig is working. Okay, so the animation is working. Let's isolate each coordinate. So we're going to isolate the X coordinate. It's moving forward. We need it to move back. So we're going to set it to -10. Yeah, something like this looks good. Perhaps a value of -5. Yeah, this looks better. As for the Y, let's set it to -10, for example, or 10 or 20, for example. Let's see. Yeah, so the Y, we want it to be positive. A value like let's say 15. We don't want it to be too much. As for the Z axis, let's click on the spine. So the Z axis will rotate the character this way. Okay, so let's set it to 20, for example. Yeah, we want it to be more subtle. Let's set it to 7. Okay, now let's work on the curves. So we want the spine offset Y to trigger a little bit later. So I'm going to set the first value to 0. Then we're going to have a curve like this. So I'm going to copy this curve and I'm going to paste it on each of the other ones. We're going to make our X start a little bit later, something like this, and then manipulate the tangent of the first point. So we can have something like this. Then I'm going to do the same for the Z curve. What I want it to do is start much later, something like this. Yeah, perhaps we can make it do something like this. Okay, now let's see. Yeah, perhaps that's a little bit much. So for the Z curve, let's bring it back a little bit. Let's bring them all back. So for the X, let's bring it a little bit back here. Because if we have them trigger too late, the animation won't be as reactive. Let's have it like this. Okay, so that looks good. So I'm going to right click on the procedural shoot animation script, then copy component. Then let's get out of play mode. I'm going to go into the XBot prefab and then click on gun and right click here, paste component values. Then I'm going to apply the spine offset and curves to the gun prefab. As for the references to the hand target and the spine constraint, we're going to set them again to the proper values. Okay, now the new animation should work for all characters. So all the characters that have the XBot object should have this animation working properly. So let's change my faction to red and see the animation in action. Yeah, the animation looks so much better. So for the gun sound, I ended up creating my own sound in FL Studio. So I'm using this sound in the gun instead of the sound that I downloaded from Pixabay. I believe it sounds better, so let's delete the Pixabay folder. Let's upgrade the gun special effects. So I downloaded the Unity Particle Pack, which is a free pack of particle effects available for free from the official Unity account on the Unity Asset Store. But I only downloaded the muzzle flash effect because that's the only thing we're going to be using. So this is the particle effect here. I'm going to change the color to something that would look sci-fi, and I'm going to disable looping and disable play on awake. So we're going to put this on our gun. So let's go into our gun prefab. So here we have the old muzzle flash effect. So we're going to put the new muzzle flash here and make sure it's in the right position. Yeah, that's a little bit too big. So let's make it smaller. Let's change the scale. Yeah, something like this would work. 0.5 scale looks good. Let's put it a little bit forward. Now we're going to remove the old effect. And in the gun script, let's make sure to set the muzzle flash reference to this. As for the tracer, let's give it a color that matches the muzzle flash. So for example, a light blue color like this. Okay, now the gun looks way better. So when we hit a wall or something, let's add an impact particle effect. So I'm just going to use my muzzle flash effect and perhaps change it a little bit so the effect looks like this. So I'm just going to change the color and we'll set the stop action to destroy. So we're going to store this as a prefab. So I'm going to add some sparks to it. So for the sparks, I added some noise, I added some trails, and I played a little bit with the gravity, and this is the result. Perhaps this is a bit too much, but we're going to save the prefab and we're going to delete it. Then in the gun script, I'm going to add an impact prefab, and let's go to the onBullet impact method. We're going to instantiate the impact prefab if it's defined, with the position set to hit point and the rotation set to quaternion look rotation with the hit normal as parameter. So let's go back to our gun prefab and let's assign the impact prefab here. So I'm going to assign my bullet impact effects. Okay, now I'm going to shoot at this wall. A little bit smaller. So this is the bullet impact. So let's put it next to our character. That way we have an idea about the scale. Yeah, so this is definitely too big. Okay, so a scale like this will work better. So let's save this prefab. So after performing some tests, it turns out that we need this play on awake to be checked. And with the stop action set to destroy, the particle effect will destroy itself after it has finished. So now it looks like this. Yeah, so a nice sci-fi effect just to add more polish to our gun mechanics. Now let's trigger a fight and see all these effects and animations in action. So that's it for this video. Thank you for watching. Remember to subscribe and hit like if you like the video. See you later.